Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a very special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
And the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always. It's absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, well, title gives it away, really. I'm here to talk of the stories of films, and I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, release stories, all those ingredients that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. That said, what you've happened upon here is one of my occasional special episodes of the podcast. I'm really thrilled to have the guest that I do on this particular instalment, because I'm being joined by producer Barbara DeFina, who produced an awful lot of films, primarily for Martin Scorsese, films such as Casino, The Last Temptation of Christ, Cape Fear, and as you're going to hear, an awful lot beyond that as well. Now, I'm going to set the conversation up with a mix of clips from a couple of films that Barbara DeFina has produced. Just a few notes just ahead of the interview itself. I mentioned Sean S. Cunningham. He's the director of Friday the 13th, who DeFina worked with on a subsequent film, just to clear that up. It comes up in the interview. You're going to get a couple of various beeps from devices throughout this chat as well. There's a point where we struggle to name a TV movie. That TV movie is 1983's The Cradle Will Fall. And we also talk about Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg, who were together at a pair of executives who were together at Paramount Pictures, then at Disney, then fell out at Disney. There's an awful lot on both of those on the internet and on past episodes of this podcast as well. We touch on an awful lot of films here, and it's a very far-reaching conversation that we're about to have. I'm going to get on with it then, if that's all the same with you. I'm going to play you clips from The Last Temptation of Christ, The Colour of Money, and from Goodfellas. Not necessarily in that order, it'll be a surprise. And then the other side of this, you'll hear my chat with the brilliant Barbara DeFina.
He's got the eye, he's got the stroke, he's got the flair.
Vincent's the best.
We got a racehorse here, a thoroughbred. You make him feel good, I teach him how to run. I'm not your daddy, I'm not your boyfriend, so don't be playing games with me. I'm your partner.
Archangel, move back. Move back, you're blinding me.
Jesus. I'm the one you've been waiting for.
Funny how? I mean, what's funny about it?
Tommy, no, you got it all wrong.
Anthony. He's a big boy. He knows what he said. What'd you say?
You're right.
Funny how? What?
Just, you're funny.
And so that was a collection of clips from the work of legendary producer Barbara DeFina, who I'm absolutely delighted is joining me for a Film Stories podcast special. Barbara DeFina, hello, how are you?
I'm great, and thank you for that great introduction.
You haven't heard what clips I'm going to play yet, though. I haven't decided those, so I could just be pulling the trap door from underneath.
It could just be the blooper reel. Huh?
That'd actually be amazing. That would be amazing. I ahead of chatting to you, I've been looking at interviews and talks that you've given in the past. I'm conscious that you've told your backstory of how you got into film a few times. I just wondered, just one thing on it, because as I've got it, just to set the scene for the listeners, you're someone who dreamed of originally working in theatre and then ended up on the set of Sidney Lumet's, I think it was the last of the mobile...
Hot Shots, yes.
Hot Shots that I've got, his 1970 film. But you've given one or two talks about how that film and getting on that set ignited your love of film and working in film in the first place. I just wonder if you could explain why. What was it on the set? Because I've read Sidney Lumet's book, and his sets sound like meticulously organised and very, very proper. And I'm just wondering, what was it about that moment that kind of was your fork in the road?
Oh, well, Sidney was a really lovely man and very encouraging and welcoming, which is not always the case. But so it was really exciting. I'd never been on a set. I thought I wanted to be in theater, but it turned out that the people that were working on the set were amazing.
Yeah.
Like James Wong Howe was the DP, and I didn't know who he was, but it was fascinating to watch him work. And I'm blanking on the Gene Callahan was the art director, production designer, and it was a great cast. Lynn Redgrave. I mean, these were all people that I just never imagined I would be on the same set with, and and I was doing office work and stuff, but we were on a stage, and so that I was very close to the action and watching people work and learning how you put a movie together. You know? And it just clicked for me. It's just like, I really like making things. And I learned this is huge. And yet I could learn all the steps, and I found it just fascinating.
So your IMDb page has a lovely little section where it says production coordinator brackets uncredited.
Yeah.
And it's those films. I've never really heard you talk about the experience of being on set of films such as An Unmarried Woman and The Next Man, the original of The Gambler and The Take Your Pelham 1, 2, 3. And I'm just curious, because once you got the bug, were you consciously looking to build towards a producer role? Because presumably you knew at this point that's the path you wanted to go into film. But what were you getting from those films?
I was, they were. What happened was I got into the union. And
right. Okay.
So I was working on those films and learning, and watching people's mistakes. I always felt that I learned a lot just by sitting there and watching people do the wrong things, as well as the right things. And those movies were, Paul Mazursky. I got to meet fascinating people. And The Next Man with Sean Connery. Yeah. And we went to Morocco. And so I just learned a lot about how movies get put together and how they fall apart. And I thought that it just fascinated me. And I learned and got to move up. I finally, after a struggle with the Directors Guild, because women who had done that, basically it was a woman's job. Yeah. So women who had done that, even though they had worked on maybe 5 movies or 10 movies, weren't allowing us to progress to being production managers or unit managers. And so that was the next step. And and they were stopping me from doing it. So I was working with Alan King, who had a production company, who did TV, which was another fun thing. I learned, television and 3 cameras and things that they don't do much anymore, but it was just all such a fascinating thing. His lawyers, who were kind of big guys in the industry, helped me get into the Directors Guild.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I didn't get to do the movie I wanted to do. My friend got to be the production manager. We worked together. Yeah. But after that, they did send me an application and take me in. So that was a big step for me.
What was the film you were wanting to do out of interest?
It was a little TV movie called How to Pick Up Girls.
Okay.
Alan King's company.
Yeah. And so Alan King, we're in the UK, so we didn't get a stand-up comedian, Alan King.
Yes, definitely. Stand up. Yes. He was in, we worked together again. He was in Casino.
Yeah, of course.
He had a part in Casino. So that was, so that was sort of an impediment I had to get over. And, now women are production managers. But all of a sudden, it became the men decided they were going to be line producers.
Right. Okay.
Like the same job, but so then I had to become a line producer, to make the next step, and then finally a producer.
I heard a talk Guillermo del Toro did before Christmas when he was promoting his Pinocchio film. And he was talking in animation that it was the first time a whole load of women who'd worked in stop frame animation got to be heads of department. And then I was listening to a talk you gave, I think it was at Bronx Film School, where you talked about, I think as late as the late 2010s, I think it was, that women were getting roles as producers, but still struggling to get these roles as directors. And I'm just curious, are you still very conscious of these ceilings, appreciating you blasted through a few yourself, but you see the restrictions still in place in the industry?
Yes, and like 2010, that era, women made a lot of progress.
Yeah,
and it hasn't really improved that much. Especially for directors, and plateaued and sometimes even gone down a little. Yeah. There was sort of a blip when women really had made some real progress. But it's just, I think it's sort of plateaued now. There are more women directors and more women producers, but certainly not 50%. It's just, it hasn't, for some reason, that we've sort of hit the wall. Not quite sure why.
And so when you're talking at film schools and such like, is that still the key thing that's coming through from the questions from the students? That just
Yes.
that lack of opportunity if you're not male. But
If you're not male and white,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard, you know. I mean, everyone has made progress,
Yeah.
and everyone is now very much aware that they have to make progress, and that it's been not just unfair, but it's also
Yeah.
there are other stories to tell. You know, there are other points of view. It's really not just movies aren't just for one group of people. So yeah, it's a very big issue, and will continue to be a big issue.
I mean, it was interesting hearing Jamie Lee Curtis's Oscar acceptance speech, where she thanked people for her genre movies who supported her, because that was where she could make her mark. And I didn't appreciate that you'd worked with Sean Cunningham on
Yes.
the Friday the 13th films, of course. I'm just wondering if genre has always, in your eyes too, just been a little path just to get round the roadblocks that people are putting in.
I didn't do Friday the 13th. I did his
No, I
next
appreciate that. Yeah.
2 movies. But yes, I mean, it gave me the opportunity to actually be like a line producer
Yeah.
and to really be in charge. That was the first time I actually got to do that. So yeah, it's very important. Those genre movies are, you know, and they're fun, and they you know, people they don't get awards, but they make a lot of money for the studios and for the producers. So.
And those were Spring Break and The New Kids.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's
Spring
a comma.
Break.
There's a comma between those two. Otherwise, that's one hell of a crossover, isn't it?
Spring Break actually did really well and made a
Yeah,
lot
so-
of money. But and it's sort of a fun, goofy movie. We went to the beach every day, you know. And then The New Kids was much darker and not quite so successful.
And so, if I've got the chronology right, it was after your work with Sean Cunningham that you came into the world of Martin Scorsese on films like After Hours and The King of Comedy originally. Can you fill in a little bit of that for
Sure,
us?
I didn't work on After Hours, but I was sort of around, and I knew the people who were working on it.
Yeah.
In New York, everybody was very friendly, and they still are. So people, you know, we'd visit each other's sets and stuff, and it's very different than LA. And I'm just learning what Rome is like, but. So I was around, and I had met Marty on King of Comedy, actually.
Yeah.
Because I had been hired to do some additional photography to put that together.
Yeah.
Because he had edited the movie for a long time, but they still needed some more footage. So that's how I met him. I met him while we were doing they weren't reshoots. It was actually added footage. So I met him, and then actually went off and did another TV movie right after. I'm trying to it was with Lauren Hutton. I'm trying to remember. You have it on your list, I'm sure.
I will fill that in, don't worry.
Yeah, with Lauren Hutton and an interesting British director who did mostly TV, but I had a great relationship with him, and he was I learned a lot from him, working with him.
One of the digging into the story of The Color of Money, which is the first time you've got a full producer credit, even though it doesn't sound like it was the first time you'd done the producer work. There's and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that struck me as like you were doing lots of this, and then the producer job came along. Would that be a fair reflection?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So The Color of Money,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's such an interesting project because for a couple of reasons. I mean, working within, again, from the outside looking in, what looked like a very frugal Disney organization at that time, the era of Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg. And I'm reading stories of this about how, as much as it was a Tom Cruise and Paul Newman movie, you were watching like the phone bills and watching who was making phone calls. What was your experience of coming into that? Because and why was it so important that one was so tightly controlled?
It was important because Marty, after King of Comedy, he had certainly spent a long time in post.
Yeah.
And I think I wasn't around for shooting, but I do think that probably went over. And I think people were a little frightened of doing a movie with him. So, and then he did After Hours, which wasn't mine, but I can tell you that was low budget. He met Michael Ballhaus,
Yeah.
which helped him really get himself together and do well for a little money. And so The Color of Money was sort of the test if he could do a studio movie and sort of keep it controlled. And that's what we did. So, and Paul Newman didn't hurt. He was he was a very strict and came in, knew his lines, did it. And, that was it. So, and then Tom Cruise that was hilarious. When we started, he was like the new kid.
Yeah.
And when we finished, he had done Top Gun. And
right,
he was
okay.
a huge star, and much more than Paul Newman at that point.
And so when that target is set out from the start, we're going to hit the budget. We're going to come in under schedule. I think you did as well.
Yeah.
So can you because Martin Scorsese's diaries of one or two books on Martin Scorsese have told his side of that. But what's your side when you're there day one and it's just like, this is an immovable beast. We've got to do this. It's got to hit. And there you are effectively producing your first film, even though you're not.
Yeah. It was actually, we shot in Chicago.
Right.
Because we wanted to do it in New York. And, there were a lot of pool halls and obviously in the movie. And we were insisting we wanted to do it in New York. And they said, no, we want you to do it in Chicago. And so we scouted Chicago, and it had a lot of really great old pool halls and a great look. And it was a little easier to work in Chicago as well. It's not as congested.
Yeah.
And then finally we said, all right, we'll do it in Chicago. And then we found out that there was only one pool hall left in Manhattan. And we was like, we dodged a bullet, but I had a production manager I had worked with.
Yeah.
On, I'm trying to remember what we worked on together. I think it was a TV show. And so I knew her, and she was from Chicago. She'd worked there for years. So she had the best crew, and she knew the city so well. She was such a help, she was a big help. So her name was Dodie. So Dodie and I worked together, and we had, no cast problems.
Yeah.
The actors were great. And so we managed, and it was also winter in Chicago. So that certainly moved things along when we were outside.
Not on the warm side, as I gather.
No, it's brutal and windy and brutal in Chicago in the winter. So it just, it's sort of everything clicked.
Yeah.
And Marty, and there was a really good tight script.
Yeah.
So it just, everything sort of fell into place, and there were no real personal issues with anyone or actor issues.
There was a lovely point in one of the interviews you've done in the past where you talked about one of your favorite times on a film is just going in a van, going from location to location, just scouting things before you've got any actors, before you've got the pressure of the day, before you've got the pressure of the schedule kicking in. Did that come a little bit from Color of Money, of discovering Chicago and all those bits and bobs that went towards making that film?
Oh, that's my favorite. That is my favorite part. We're doing that now on this movie I'm working on.
Yeah.
And I always say that's the best part of the movie, because everyone is happy to be there. Everyone's still friendly.
Yeah.
There's no conflict. And, when we ride around, we look at great things, and then we have lunch, And so it's like the sort of perfect part of it. And then after that, it's the really hard work. But at this point, it's just everyone's sort of happy to be there.
And yet the other side of that is you've talked a couple of times in the past about one of the absolute thrills of being a film producer for you is problem solving, that's your other favorite part of it. But presumably that's at completely the other end of the spectrum when the tensions are bubbling right up.
Well, it's also part of the scouting, because it's sort of putting pieces together and, trying to find places that work, that also work with other places. It's sort of like a puzzle.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, that's part of the fun of it as well. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of problem solving, and, it's raining, and the lunch didn't come, and, but, the more you do it, the more you know that it's going to work out, And so, you always work it out,
And so The Color of Money comes in, as I've got, the numbers I've got are $1.5 million under budget, which for someone like Jeffrey Katzenberg presumably gets you right to the top of his Christmas list.
Yes.
And a day ahead of schedule as well. And then the film comes out as it is. And I'm just wondering, what was it like being at the heart of that success? And then what was that unlocking for you? Because was The Last Temptation of Christ lined up as the next project after that immediately, or was the success of Color of Money pivotal to that?
We were going to do Goodfellas right after that.
Yeah. Because I got the script for that Nicholas Pileggi came into your life just around there.
We were going to do Goodfellas, which when we were in Chicago, I had found the article in New York Magazine because there was an excerpt, and we had looked at it and decided it was really interesting, and that was going to be the next movie. But then Last Temptation, which Marty had been trying to do for a couple of years and had failed, and it had just fallen apart. I guess it was Paramount.
Yeah.
And he, all of a sudden, Tom Pollock at Universal, we also had made a deal with Disney. We had sort of an overall deal with Disney, sort of what they call a housekeeping deal, which meant they paid our little overhead and, hired some staff and stuff for us.
Because did Disney offer you Dick Tracy around that time? Have I got that right?
I'm not, it gets a little blurry for me, but I do remember Dick Tracy. It didn't last that long, but I do remember meeting with Warren, and I can't exactly remember why it didn't happen, but I think it just didn't sort of gel.
Yeah.
How you get to that point where it all comes together or it doesn't. And I think it didn't gel. And then there was another movie that Warren wanted to do about an astronaut.
I've got that. Yeah. Oceans of Storms,
yes, which I thought was fascinating. It's about a man who goes up into space and comes back.
Yeah.
And then all he wants to do is get back up into space. I mean, it was such a great feeling. Nothing else sort of compared,
Yeah.
So we worked on the script for that for a while, but that didn't come together. And, Maureen went off and did Dick Tracy. And but somewhere along this is all sort of mixed up together. But Tom Pollock offered Last Temptation, but we had to do it with a very small budget. So basically I said, well, show me the old budget that you were going to, and I didn't get past the above the line, the top, because there was just no way, that's why it didn't work, because it was such a risk.
Yeah.
Nobody was going to risk all that money for something that might not work, or might not find even a theater owner who would show it. So that was part of when Mike Ovis came into everybody's life.
Got you.
That was sort of the carrot that he introduced Marty in Last Temptation to Pollock. Yeah.
And so, going back to that moment where you looked at the budget that they used to have, and then you presumably you oversee and put together the budget that they did have, what kind of difference are we talking, and what kind of conversations were you having to have?
Oh, we just had to sort of, in a sense, start over. We had a script.
Yeah.
And we were lucky that Tom was generous, and they settled out whatever the Paramount money was.
Right.
There was money against it. So we didn't have to pay that back. So we just started fresh with a new budget, but a very low budget. And we had a cast. We got most of the cast back. We found the costumes in a rental house in London, because they were well along building sets and sort of put it back together, but didn't. They were going to shoot in Israel. We shot it in Morocco, which was much less expensive. So it was like putting the pieces that worked back and finding some stuff and working it out.
Is it a case when you sit opposite a studio executive and you're talking about a film that has religion deep at the heart of it, a Kundun, a Silence, or a Last Temptation of Christ, that the blood is almost draining from their faces? Is there a kind of innate fear to it?
Tom Pollock has just taken the job at Universal.
Yeah.
He's a lawyer. He was sort of, First Amendment and all that. And I think he didn't understand. I don't think afterwards he would have done it again, but I can't speak for him, but I think it was quite an experience.
Yeah, well, it certainly. I mean, you just dropped into the conversation there. I mean, you shot in Morocco, and just reading about the production of it, I've got that the fact you had heavy rainfall just cutting you off, so you couldn't get back to Marrakesh on one particular day. You were hit by all sorts of almost biblical
Biblical.
style.
Oh, it was, and
Yeah.
we said next the lotus are coming. It's like it was just we had flood, we had a lot of sand and wind, and it was everything sort of happened, and yet but it was over quickly. But I remember we were in the desert, and there were these big sort of gullies,
Yeah.
and we would go down in them and stuff, and they say, I wonder where the water is, and it would but dry for miles and miles as far as you can see, and then it started raining,
Yeah.
and the water just it just came down, the gullies filled, ran over the roads, and we did have trouble getting back to the hotel that night.
You're smiling about it as we're talking about it, but at the time, where was your blood pressure?
Oh, my blood pressure I think is always high, but I remember on the way back, the water was so high that the bridge that we had to go over was underwater. So it was like we were all holding our breath that we would stay on the bridge and that the bridge wouldn't fall, but everybody got back okay. But it was like where's all the water? And then we found out.
Careful what you wish for. Michael Bauhaus gave a quote on this where he described the making of that as it was almost like war. He said we had to have a plan for every shot. We were counting the minutes on the film. Is that your recollection as well?
Oh yes, we would say how many minutes there were some days that were so tight. We would say how many minutes do we have for this shot, and he would actually count down. And then sometimes we would hear the call to prayer, and we would say, oh no, it's like it's the evening already. Where it was like that was our time. It was, but yes, it was very much like that.
Could you have done that if you hadn't done Colour of Money and got that absolutely regimented on schedule? Did that give you a set of skills to get Last Temptation of Christ?
Yeah, but I think I even got it earlier than that when I was line producing, because you're even on the line even more.
Yeah.
With keeping the set going. But it's to me, see, I found that experience kind of thrilling. I loved it that we actually got through it, and working with Sean again, as you said, Sean Cunningham was a great school, because those movies are made very quickly.
Yeah.
And very on low budgets. And so I learned a lot on that as well, but I sort of like the challenge.
So I just wonder, reflecting now, is it almost a relief that when people talk about Last Temptation of Christ now, they actually talk about the film?
Yes,
because that's taken so long, it feels.
That's such a problem. Everybody was talking about it, but not about the film. It got all this press and everything, but it wasn't about the movie at all.
Yeah.
People weren't even going to see the movie, and yet they were criticizing it, and picketing, and there were the theaters. There were all these women in blue, praying.
Yeah.
And they say they're praying for us,
Because it was interesting contrasting it with the release of something like Silence many years later, and Silence actually felt like it could be released and people would watch the film and then start talking about it.
They did, yes.
Yeah. And I just wonder if that's a kind of shifting of the times a little bit. Because I grew up in the UK, and the first we all heard of The Last Temptation of Christ was the tabloid newspapers over here, which aren't very nice at the best of times, decided you were their new target. Yeah. You felt that keenly, presumably.
Yes, we lived with bodyguards for
Good
yeah.
Good grief.
Nothing that I know of. Terrible happened, but we definitely had to have some security for several weeks, and then finally it sort of died down.
And then you've got in your back pocket this this article that you saw that Nicholas Pileggi had written. And so while you were making Last Temptation of Christ, were you also developing that at the same time? Was that going in tandem?
Yes, we were. And Nick I think we had a script by then. We were getting close to actually doing the movie. Yeah. And then Last Temptation came along, which is so he had to do it. He wanted to do it. He had to do it.
Yeah.
And then we did Goodfellas. Yeah.
So I've heard of Goodfellas. I'm very au fait with that film and might have watched that an enormous number of times. But when was a project like Goodfellas at its most fragile? I mean, because I mean, there's an awful lot being written about that film, and it just feels like that extra gestation time might have helped it. I don't know. I'm from the outside looking in, really.
I don't know. I mean,
but
Nick's script was, there's a book.
yeah, Made Men.
Nick's script was very tight and very good.
Yeah,
And he knows that world. He lived that world. And I think, and after Color of Money, obviously they wanted to make that movie.
yeah.
It was very dark. Warner's I think at one point they didn't quite know what to make of it because it was so dark and yet funny.
Yeah.
And the audiences, it was interesting when we had the previews, the audiences didn't quite understand. They were having fun and people were doing sort of bad things, but they're still having fun. And then we got to the point where Spider got shot.
Yeah.
And they put the guy's head in the pizza oven and stuff. And all of a sudden it wasn't funny anymore. And so the whole tone shifted.
Yeah.
And it was a very, it wasn't something that the audience was used to. I mean, today they are, but at that point, I think it was strange to them.
But you come through this, and you were making films with a real independent edge to them that were coming through the studio system.
Yes.
And presumably you were au fait with working within the corridors of studios and how to navigate them at that point.
I always had a very good relationship with the studio executives. I always, would stay in touch with them and be totally honest, and and say, this is the budget and this is what I think about it, but in a studio, if you have a good relationship, you can go and say, oh, we really need more money for this or that, and they could give you something called an approved overage. Yeah. Which is different in an independent movie. Like the movie I'm making now, there's no approved overages. There's we have a budget and that's it.
Yeah.
So I find, actually, I like working at the studio. If you need something, you can call the insurance department, or you can call the prop department, or you can call the legal department. When you're doing an indie movie, that you have to take care of that all yourself. So,
I mean, it's always fascinating, the history of Warner Brothers, that Goodfellas was out the year after Batman, seemingly transformed the expectations of that studio, and certainly the kind of projects it was making thereafter. That's why I was kind of wondering if it was ever that fragile. It just seemed to fit at just the right time within that studio.
I think it hit at the right time. I think nobody expected it to. I think it got more and more, people loved it like a year or so after.
Yeah.
I mean, when it first opened, I think people were like not quite sure what it was. But in the years that have passed, people have loved the movie. And there is some, I don't often watch movies that I've made more than but there's something about when Goodfellas comes on that it's very engaging for some reason. I don't know what it is, but the actors were great. But
I mean, I'm curious really on a film like that, and it's such a dimwit question, which I pride myself on asking. But when do you know? When do you know that you've got this lightning in a bottle on something? Do you not find out until a couple of years afterwards, or do you, from your perspective, get sense that earlier on a project?
I don't. It's hard to say, but I sort of go by, do I like it? Yeah. Does it interest me? Does it some sort of say something to me? Is it or the actors appealing or stuff, things like that? But I don't think you ever know until after.
And so off the back of Goodfellas' successes, I'm going past Goodfellas a little bit quickly just because so much has been written about it, and I don't think I can add an awful lot there. You went on to Cape Fear, which I think was Mike Ovitz pushing Martin Scorsese and yourselves towards doing a more commercial film. But also, was there a Schindler's List swap in the midst of that as well?
There was a swap. There was Marty.
Not for the first time, I'll say it. Yeah.
Marty was going to do Schindler. Steven Spielberg had been trying to do Schindler's for a long time and couldn't get a script, I think, actually. Yeah. So he gave it to Marty. And Marty and Steve Zalian and I looked at it and worked on it and got it into pretty much what he shot. But it wasn't Marty who shot it. It was Steven who shot it, because Marty traded Schindler back and Steven gave him Cape Fear. And so Stephen, and then we had to rewrite Cape. They were rewriting Cape Fear actually on the set. The writer, this I think it's the only time we actually had a writer on the set.
Yeah.
Working on it.
Was that Wesley Strick on it?
Yes, it was Wesley. And Stephen did Schindler, and you know what happened with that. What a wonderful movie.
Yeah.
And then Marty did Cape Fear. And Stephen, my memory is that Stephen said, "You can do whatever you want, but please don't kill the family."
Oh, really?
Yeah, do whatever you want, but let them live. Which he didn't. The family lived, and
yeah. You did make them watch the film Problem Child, though. That was my memory of Cape Fear. That's worse. Sorry, that's terrible. I shouldn't say that. But I paid good money to watch Problem Child, and I still want a refund after all this time. There was a lovely story you've told on Cape Fear, and apologies for getting you to repeat it, but the perils of location scouting. And I didn't know this at all about how you scouted Cape Fear all through. The
house.
I'm going to let you tell it. I'm going to shut up because I just love this.
Yeah, it's also believing people, you know, who or people that give you gifts, you know. We were scouting for the house, the big house.
Yes, the house
in the middle of nowhere, and I think it was somebody from local, maybe even from like the film commission or something, though I don't remember exactly, who showed us the house, and we said, "Wow, this is great," and it's empty. And there's all this land, and it's so easy to work here. And what a great location. And so all summer, I guess, they worked on the house, and we prepped and everything. And then around Thanksgiving in October, November, we found out that it was very close to the airport that we couldn't see. It was far away, and at that time of year, they opened this particular runway because there was so much traffic. And so just as we were about to start shooting, the planes started landing and taking off. And so this wonderful location turned into this nightmare of plane sounds, you know. So we had to put people with radios in the tower who would then talk to us and say, "Okay, flight such and such is leaving, and you've got like an hour or 40 minutes to shoot before another one comes in," or you know. So it just turned out to be this worst possible location in the world. It was literally next to a runway, an airport runway.
I mean, from the outside looking in, Cape Fear looks like one of the ones that should be the more straightforward to put together. But that's the one where you had someone on set rewriting the script. And that's the one where you had to basically put a member of staff in the airport to tell you what was going on.
Yeah. Telling us when a plane was coming in or taking off.
I mean, was it a tough film to do that? Because again, that one's not really talked about an awful lot. But outside of challenges like that, was it otherwise relatively even?
It was easy. I had worked in Florida before, and I knew some of the people who did special effects. So we had to, you know, we went into it not having a tank for the houseboat. Yeah. And after a while, we decided we really needed a tank. So we built a tank. Yeah. It's just really like a giant swimming pool, and a shallow, and with just a roof over it. And so it was actually, that part was fun because I learned about how they do all those big waves and things. And so that was, you know, it wasn't just wind, but they have these things called dump tanks, these huge tanks full of water that you fill up with water, and then they pull the bottom out and all the water comes gushing, and that's how you make the big waves and when we have the storm. So that was kind of fun. I mean, it was sort of, and we were on it like a set. Yeah. So we control everything. So that part of it was fun. But and then we did a model of the houseboat. Yeah. It's kind of, we call it a model, but they're huge, but not as big as the houseboat, but big. So, I mean, a lot of that was kind of fun and interesting and a learning experience, but the house sort of made up.
And so, I mean, the one that's not talked about enough that in the intervening space between the two, Goodfellas, Cape Fear, and Casino, is of course The Age of Innocence. Yes. And reading into that, I mean, what a dear film that is, but reading into that was a film that changed studios as well, if I've got that right. And I read a quote that just said the green light to start making The Age of Innocence didn't actually come until 3 weeks after you'd started shooting. Is that right?
I'm not sure, but my memory is that a lot of the movies, it's what people always say, just start spending money.
Yeah.
If you're giving you money, just keep going.
Don't ask. Yeah.
It's a studio. It's not like an independent or an investor or something that you're going to disappoint. So a lot of the movies, you just keep going. A lot of the contracts aren't signed until a month later, or it's just as long as they're happy and they're giving you money, it's better than a green light,
And so that was also the one where your production company's name appears, Barbara DeFina Productions. That's the first film, I think, that I could
probably.
I find it on. And I remember following the story of the making of just through film magazines of The Age of Innocence, and the story of it just seemed to be it kept getting delayed, or the release date kept getting shunted back. I'm just wondering, what was it like on the inside of that, and if it was a hard project to pull together, particularly.
It was very different.
Yes.
For the group, I don't remember it being very hard. I remember it. I think probably the date was changing because post-production wasn't going well.
Right.
So the movie just wasn't ready.
Yeah.
My memory isn't that the studio was holding it back. I think, unfortunately, we were probably holding back the studio.
Right. And is it true, the thing that if you're making a period drama, the days are much longer?
I don't know. We had Michael Ballhaus, so the days moved.
Right.
He was
after Last Temptation of Christ, you can throw anything at you all.
Yeah, and he was so good with Marty but if he couldn't do something that Marty really wanted, he would always have an alternative immediately.
Yeah.
And so I can't do that, but I can do this for you, and so things would move quickly that way.
But you gave a really interesting interview around the time of the making of that, where you talked about how the tone and the feel on the set of a period drama is different to other films. And I've heard one or two people say that. I just wonder if you can just explain that a little bit. Is it whether it's just a little bit more relaxed, whether actors are slightly different in those kind of roles?
Well, Daniel Day-Lewis stayed in his character.
Yes, I'd believe that. So, I'd believe that. Yeah.
His motorhome had all sorts of period things, and Michelle not so much, but I think it's just different because you're not out, you're not shooting things off and you're not blowing anything up, so it is much more subdued because the action is so much more subdued.
And then you go from that to Casino. And Casino, there was I remember Premiere magazine running a great big huge diary of the making of Casino around the time of that, and it just looked mind-boggling that it was a 264 sequence film just to map out and plot. And then there was and again, correct me on any of this, but there was a moment in that diary where it just talks about Martin Scorsese walking out into the desert, saying, "Oh yeah, I'll have a crane shot here," and then walking out. I remember reading that and think that what he's just said has just made a lot of work for a bunch of people to make stuff like that happen. Can you talk about your perspective of the challenges of Casino? And because again, a really well-regarded film now, but it looked like a swine to make.
Well, the hardest part was that, Las Vegas is 24/7.
Yeah.
And the casinos are open 24 hours a day. So the hardest part was finding a casino that they wanted the movie to be made. They just didn't want it to be made in their casino because they didn't want to shut anything down.
Yeah.
So we did finally find, the Riviera would take us, but only on very specific hours. And we had to bring everything in and take it out. Every day. Yeah. So, and we had to shoot like they call it like the graveyard shift overnight when it's quieter. Yeah. And they would give us a certain area where we were allowed to shoot. And then there would still be people playing the slots and stuff, but they were in the far back, so you couldn't identify them. But it was just bringing the stuff in and out every day. Made it difficult. If somebody was coming in, there's one area by the poker room. Yeah, I think they were allowed in the poker room, but if they say, quote, if like what they call a whale was coming in with a lot of money, we couldn't. At any moment we would be kicked out because that's how they, make their money, and those are the people that they like to service. So at any time, we would say, I'm sorry, you can't use this area for 2 days or something. And then we'd have to move off to somewhere else until that poor person lost all their money.
Oh dear. Oh dear. But I mean, in the midst of it as well, one of the things that gets me about that film is Martin Scorsese talked about it as a film that's got a story but not a plot. And which I think is a little bit harsh on it, really. But
Yeah.
also there's stories of Thelma Schumacher having to rearrange it a lot in post-production as well. I'm just wondering what shape it was in at the point you were ready to go, because again, you've got Nicholas Pileggi there, and all the ingredients are clearly there. But what were the challenges just getting it to a point of a shooting script?
Well, the problem was that he started the book. He was writing the book, and then the studio wanted the movie desperately. They wanted it.
Yeah.
So they said, we had to just write a script and get going. So he dropped the book.
Yeah.
And he started writing the script, but because he didn't finish the book, he didn't really finish the story.
Right.
So they had to figure out in the script writing, figure out the story.
Yeah.
And there were scenes that were written early that we even scheduled and kept pushing them back and back and back. And then we never actually shot them because they didn't quite fit the story anymore. They were great scenes, but they just didn't belong in that story anymore. So it was a little bit of a shuffle and losing some stuff. And so it was never really as tight a script as Goodfellas, for example. It was never really tight.
But also it was never the point if you've got the script writer on set, it didn't get to that extreme.
No, Nick would be writing, but he might be writing an extra scene here and there, but not on set.
So one of the things I read, and going to what you've just said as well, is that because the film came out ahead of the book, the burden of the legal checks was on you, by the sounds of it. That whereas Goodfellas, the book Wise Guys was out first. I know I'm telling you things you know. This is just for listeners who don't know. The book Wise Guys was out first, and thus the book publishers have had to run that through their legal checks and how close it was going to real people. The burden of that shifted onto the film with Casino by the chronology of what came out first. Go on, sorry.
Actually, in Goodfellas, what happened was for months and months, they said, don't worry, you can use the real names.
Really?
They said, don't worry, you can use all the real names and it's fine. And we said, okay. And all the real names were in the original script, and everyone was prepping. And like a week or two before we started shooting, they said, oh, you know what? I think we need to change the names. So they changed the names and confused everyone. Everybody's, prep work and notes and all had the wrong names other than Henry, who obviously, and his wife, Karen, who had signed.
Yeah.
We had to change all the other names.
My life. And so how does that materially affect your work that week? Just out of interest, just going down.
People were just like confused, and, we had to send I forget how many different page colors we sent out. But, it was just a blip, but a confusing, annoying. And so in Casino, the legal department, the studio did all the checking.
Yeah. So I mean, you wrap up Casino, and I mean that comes with an enormous weight of expectations as well. And I'm a huge fan of the film, but if memory serves, I think Heat had started filming after Casino and arrived just before. You had the two Robert De Niro films hitting at roughly the same time. Mm-hmm. That release window and that release period of Casino and the response to it, not least, I think you already had battles with the MPAA on Goodfellas, and thus Casino was a particularly special case. Can you take us into that part of your life?
Well, on Goodfellas, it had to do with mostly when he gets shot.
Yes.
And he's on the tile floor, and the blood is, and actually Marty kept. They're not supposed to tell you exactly what it is, but Marty kept trimming it, knowing that was probably the problem. But finally, he was trimming the wrong end.
Oh, right.
He kept trimming it, and he kept saying, I'm trimming it. What's wrong? And so it was confusion. But I think that was the only really difficult thing in Goodfellas. I might be wrong.
Yeah.
But in Casino, the head and the vice, it's... He shot different variations, and some of them were extreme.
Yeah.
Knowing that it would never happen, but it would never get in the movie.
Presumably that's kind of why you do it, though, doesn't it? You just offer them a bit of bait and then say, we'll
And then
switch
take it back. Yeah. So
that's the experienced producer. That's
yeah, but it's like we were joking the other day. It's like anything you show when you're showing somebody locations or real estate. You always make sure you show them something that's just absolutely wrong, so they feel they've had a choice, right?
yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of the same, Well, oh yeah, okay, it's better now,
Before we run out of time, sorry, I appreciate I'm pressing things just a little, but can I talk about a couple of the other films that you produced in the midst of all of this as well? Because I distinctly, for instance, remember taking my 70-year-old aunt to go and to watch Mad Dog and Glory. 1990, of course. And I mean, the fruity scene in that, I remember turning to her and just saying, should you be watching this? She said, oh, shut up, just like that. But these, because that and The Grifters as well, and working with directors like Stephen Frears and John Norton in the midst of all of that, can you talk about those experiences and the films that you were seeking out, that's the smaller inverted comma ones that you were trying to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, Mad Dog and Glory just came sort of, it was, Richard Price again.
Yeah.
The writer, and it sort of came together really quickly with Bob and Bill Murray.
Bill Murray, yeah.
I actually had a good experience with Bill.
Yeah, the very fact you're saying it like that does tell, as has been reported, not everyone has. Yeah,
drop it right there. But I really like Bill. We had a good time, and he was very well behaved, and Uma. And Bob. So I mean, I had, it was a fun movie to do, and John was very easygoing. John McNaughton, the director. Yeah. So we did it in Chicago again. Went back to Chicago,
and that brought you into Richard Price's world, which nearly brought you Clockers, which you did Casino instead of Clockers in the end.
Yeah, and we started with Richard, and then Spike came in, which was great, and then The Grifters actually is one of my favorite movies.
It's a great film, isn't it?
It's just so a little bit nasty. I just love it. And the poster is great. And it's just Stephen is terrific. So Stephen Frears. So, I mean, I had a lot of fun with that movie. I really liked it.
Yeah, I interviewed, we had Stephen Frears on this podcast last year. And as an interview, I just found him, and there's no edge or shade to this, but I just found him very individual. It's just like, there's no, there's no conforming to a textbook with him. I was asking him fairly standard questions about how do you do this, how do you do that, and he was just like, I don't know. I just do it and stuff like that. And I just love the matter of factness of it. But you did a second film with him as well, which is talked about later. It was The High Low Country, Stephen.
Yes, we did. Yeah. Which again, it was like a great experience. We're out in the, in New Mexico, I think, and with horses and cowboys and stuff. Well, that Stephen just did that is kind of amazing. But it was, again, it was like a real fun kind of interesting, a little, in some ways difficult, because we're out in the, outside a lot. And none of us were really that comfortable with horses and things. But they were great. I'm blanking on the name of the book author, but
I'll dig that in. Don't worry, I'll put that in.
Yeah, but he was terrific. I mean, it was a great new world to investigate.
Yeah, and then of course I have to touch on You Can Count on Me. I've got to. I mean, the film that cemented to me that Laura Linney is one of the most underrated actors of her generation. What a performer Laura Linney is. And then Kenneth Lonergan as well. And I'm really curious because I've got no idea of the backstory of that film at all and how you two came into each other's world. I just wonder if you could tell us just a bit about that. Because
Marty knew Kenny through one of his doctors, I think. And Kenny, who is a playwright who also makes movies, came to him and said, I'm making this movie. I'm a little nervous. And so we were kind of invited in. Yeah. By the other two producers, Jeff Sharp and I can't remember, John. And we were invited in, and so I sort of got to work with Kenny, and he reminds me a little bit of Stephen Frears.
Right. Okay.
Kind of, I don't know how Stephen used to say, "I'm just a little boy from London." I don't know how that worked out, but and he had sort of that kind of attitude, and but he's really smart and fun to work with. And Laura and Mark Ruffalo were terrific, and it was just such sweet little. I mean, we all read the script and thought this is really such a wonderful story and script, and never thought it would blow up the way it did.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing really sort of flashy or and it's just there's something about the people and the characters he drew that are so.
Well, I mean, from a producer point of view, was that your first experience of a film blowing up at Sundance as well, and going to try and fight for attention for your film that way round?
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'd done indie movies, but not that got to Sundance.
Yeah,
different world then.
And what did you discover about that world that you hadn't kind of seen before?
It's it's all sales, and it's it's creative, and yet it's very, very much about sales.
Yeah.
And selling your movie and selling markets and doing it, TV, and it's putting things together, which is difficult.
Yeah.
Even the movie I'm not on now, I've spent more time working on putting the deal together than actually creatively at this point, because it's such a difficult process, and the business plan is very, very unforgiving.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got two more questions just to wrap this up. And one of them ties directly into that, because I've interviewed several producers over the years who always have the war stories. I've worked that out as well. But if I can just ask us simply, really, what kind of producer are you? Because I never get the same answer to this. What you ask one person what a producer is, I get a similar but not entirely the same answer each time. So how would you describe you as a producer? Where's your happy place in the film process?
Well, my happy place is the first day of shooting.
Yeah.
Because it all got, and after that it's fun, but because you just got everybody there.
Yeah.
But I think I'm a different producer on not every different movie, but most of the time. I mean, there's the producer that puts all the pieces together.
Yeah.
And then there's the producer who works at the studio. And, once you get the green light, or they start funding you, then you become a more creative producer. But the indies, I think, is more of a business producer, as well as some creative process. But
is that bit a bit less fun?
The business part, yeah.
Yeah.
It's less fun, yeah.
It's a fascinating journey from that person who walked onto Sidney Lumet's set in 1970. And we've only touched on just a handful of your incredible stories. Can I just round up by just asking, because you're in Rome at the moment, you've hinted once or twice in this chat. So can you tell us as much as you're allowed about what you're doing in Rome?
Oh, we're doing a movie that's it's what they call a pickup. It's for Paramount Plus, but it's a streamer. Yeah. But they basically gave us a contract that said, we'll give you X amount of money. Yeah. And at a certain date, you'll deliver a movie.
Okay.
But that means that you have to take that piece of paper to a bank. Yeah. Get a loan. It's like building a house. You have to get a loan. And then you have to go to an insurance company called a completion bond. Yeah. And they will guarantee to the bank that the movie will be finished and delivered. So there are all these sort of moving parts that have to somehow work together. And then, they all have to approve the cast. And so there's just a lot of just moving parts that you have to sort of make work. Yeah. So, and one works and the other one falls out,
And how close are you to that magical day one on this one where it's all come together?
We're spending money.
Okay, that's good.
We haven't closed the bank loan, but we're supposed to close it in the next week. And the bond is pretty close to closing. So we're at the point where it all might come together. But it's been months and months of this.
I've just been reading Michael Dealey's book on producing The Italian Job for Paramount, and he provides the financial statement 30 years on that talks about how the $3 million film to make is still $9 million in debt after 30 years. So you're in that world at the moment.
Yes, definitely.
Well, I hope you have a really nice lunch while you're doing your location scouting. Barbara DeFina, this has been a delight. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
And that was my conversation with Barbara DeFina. Casino has just landed on streaming services in the UK, actually. That was one of the reasons she was talking to me. A huge thanks to Mark Foley-Comer, who fought hard to get me that chat. It's a conversation I've been wanting to have for an awful long time. That's pretty much it for the episode, though. I can't really top that, can I? If you want more from me, you can find me on Twitter at Simon Brew. You can find Film Stories on Twitter at Film Stories. Our website is filmstories.co.uk. If you like what we do, then you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Simon Brew, or head to our shop, store.filmstories.co.uk, where you'll find a wealth of printed film magazines that we make for sale. All the details are there. For now, though, well, I'm going to leave you in peace, and thank you so much for your time. I'll be back soon with your regular episode of Film Stories. Until then, bye-bye.